Good morning, and power to the people, and uhuru, and praise God. Covered all. A few days ago, Bill Clinton made headlines by helping his wife look worse than she had already done on her own. They are a tag team, and every day, one of them volunteers to put a foot firmly in their mouth and remind everyone how awful they are. On this particular occasion, Bill Clinton was interrupted by protesters who rightly pointed out that his 1994 crime bill vastly increased the numbers of black people behind bars. But Bill Clinton, being Bill Clinton, reacted angrily and accused the protesters of defending gang members and killers and drug dealers. And before this, I had already written that if he wants to help his wife, he should stay off the campaign trail altogether. But he won't, and keeps proving me right. But there's a bigger point to be made about the Clintons and Bernie Sanders and how black people respond to them and to the Democratic Party. And I have to confess, I guess I'm in a church, I should, but I and other people still voted for Bill Clinton. And this was after the crime bill, after the welfare reform bill, after all of the horrible policies that he inflicted on the country and the world. I was that typical fearful black voter, and I voted for Democrats no matter what, and I was not alone. Now, having awakened from that slumber, I'm proud to say that now I don't feel the burn, and I'm not with Hillary, and I won't be voting for either one of them in November. But I also argue that voting for Clinton isn't any worse than voting for Barack Obama. And I'm here to say that we must stop this losing proposition altogether. We have to stop voting for the Democrats. And that will be the first step towards liberation and self-determination for black people. When Bernie Sanders began the election season with a draw in Iowa and a victory in New Hampshire, the foolishness that substitutes for black politics today came out into the open in all of its awful glory. It was just ridiculous. First, there was a photo from 50 years ago showing a white man at a protest. And there was this whole thing. Was it Bernie Sanders? Was it not Bernie Sanders? And he wasn't the one in that particular photo. But there was a photo of him at another rally. It really was him. And yes, he was active with CORE in Chicago. And Hillary's family were Republicans, and she was a Goldwater girl. And this information may be interesting to some people, but frankly, there's nothing there. It's not unusual for people of their age to have been in marches or to have been raised by Republicans but become a Democrat. The real issue is what does any of this have to do with black people? And at this moment, the Congressional Black Caucus was true to form, and for the reasons that Glenn just stated, they stuck with Hillary Clinton, and they got their political action committee to endorse her. Now, that is their arm which lobbies with big pharma and cigarette makers, but it's a distinction without a difference. The endorsement gave the appearance of CBC members endorsing Clinton, and they didn't disappoint. Charles Rangel, whose district we're now in, said that he didn't know any black people who knew Bernie Sanders. John Lewis, who gets a lot of mileage out of being called a civil rights icon, said he didn't know Bernie Sanders from back in the day, but he did know Bill and Hillary, except not really at that moment, but he did meet them later on. Then, of course, Al Sharpton, when he senses somebody else might be president, he rears his ugly head, and he had lunch with Sanders at Sylvia's, but Sanders looked a little uncomfortable being in Al's embrace, and he ought to. But all of this is part of the hoax that we go through every 4 years, the hoax of the presidential election. And I call it a hoax because it gives an illusion that the US is a democracy and that the people have a voice. But we know that it is no such thing, because we never get what we want from the political system. And the second part of that hoax concerns black people in particular. We live in fear of many things that are not issues for other people. We're afraid of the police, afraid of losing our jobs, and we'll hear later today, we're afraid of being kicked out of our homes by gentrification. But when election years come around, we are most afraid of Republicans, as Glenn Ford just described them, the white people's party. And we have reason to be fearful, but feeling as if we have no recourse other than to continue in allegiance to the Democrats when they do us no good is certainly no answer to our problems. This year we have an interesting situation with the rise of Bernie Sanders. One candidate was declared the front runner because of fundraising prowess and name recognition and a seeming certainty of victory. And of course, I mean Hillary Clinton. And that perceived front runner status made her a favorite among the always anxious black voter. But Hillary being Hillary, she wore out her welcome as soon as the campaign season began. Her high-handedness, her tone deafness, and the history of her own and her husband's corruption made discerning voters think twice and take a look at Bernie Sanders. Now, Sanders has called himself a socialist. Now he refers to himself as a social democrat. But he stated for the record that he's not in favor of public ownership of the means of production, so he isn't a socialist at all. Yeah. He's just a Democrat. But the party has moved so far to the right over the years that anyone sounding like most Democrats sounded 40 or 50 years ago is able to call themselves a leftist even when they're no such thing. Now, Hillary Clinton is leading in the delegate count mostly because of overwhelming victory in the southern states. There are few, if any, white Democrats in the South, so that means black voters stuck with the status quo. Sanders' supporters then proceeded to ask what was wrong with those crazy black people. Don't they love Bernie like they do? But it's the wrong question to ask if we're interested in self-determination. The bigger issue is why we're still allowing ourselves to be herded like sheep into the arms of the Democrats again. We have so little to show for being the most loyal constituency that they have. And that question should be our emphasis, not trying to figure out if Bernie is better than Hillary.